If you've been around for any amount of time, you know that I have a very type A personality. I thrive on systems and schedules and goals, and one of my favorite things to do is to sit down with a cozy drink and a pile of planners and plan out the coming year. This year, though, I have been dragging my feet a bit to actually put pen to paper and set any goals or plans for 2024 because I feel like so much is in the air with our 8th baby due any day, and also because I've experienced serious health and mental struggles in the past when I've put too much focus on hitting business or home project goals during the postpartum and newborn season, which will be coming right as we dive into the new year. Instead, I've just been busying myself with nesting projects and making food in preparation for the arrival of our baby. There have been moments where I've been tempted to just throw out the planners and forget goal planning completely this year. But on the flip side, I know that I don't do well without structure and goals either. So I decided that this week, in celebration of the new year, I'd take you along as I find this balance for myself, in hopes that it could help anyone else who is feeling like they want a goal plan for the year, but also know that their number one priority is serving their family as a homemaker, a mom, and a wife. If you're new here, I'm Stacy, homeschooling and homesteading mama of 7, on a mission to ditch the grocery store and become more self-sufficient. Subscribe to our channel to learn more about our journey and how we are making that dream come true. The Homestead Goal Planner printable I show myself using here is a freebie to my email list, so if you'd like it, there is a link below. The first thing I decided to do was to just let myself dream a little on paper. This is often called a brain dump, but basically it's just getting everything out of your head and onto paper. A lot of the time, just doing this relieves a lot of anxiety and also allows me to see my goals and thoughts in a different light where I can prioritize and plan more effectively without just shutting down because it all feels like too much in a busy season. This is obviously going to look very different for every person. For me, I have my business goals to think about, as well as homesteading, homemaking, personal health, financial, homeschooling, family, and spiritual goals. I think just creating these buckets so that I can organize my thoughts is a huge help. And I want to point out here that I didn't let myself say, oh, I can't do that, I'm too busy, or I'll have a newborn. This is just the dream big phase. And I knew that putting a filter on my brain dump would actually just create more anxiety, so don't overthink things here, just write everything down that comes to mind. The next thing I did was to pick one overarching goal for each category. So for example, my homesteading goal for 2024 is to finish our barn and animal setups for each of the animals that we are currently raising and to make these setups clean and efficient to care for. Last year we built our barn and got it about 80% done. We now need to finish the interior and get it set up. We also put in pasture fencing, but there are a lot of tweaks we could make to how the whole system works that would make it more ideal, such as fencing for rotational grazing and watering systems and keeping the pigs separate from the cows. I chose this goal even though I had other things in mind, like growing 100% of our veggies for the year, but I knew that the barn project made more sense during this busy season because a lot of it will actually be hands-off for me until later in the year since my husband does all of the building. I do more of the planning and organizing. And then it also was focused on finishing a project instead of starting a new one, which is less overwhelming and honestly something I struggle to do. I love to start projects and not see them to completion, so this will be a great focus for me. For my homemaking goal, I said I would pick a room to focus on each month and a few organization and project goals for that room to complete. This was an example of me being intentionally broad, but still creating structure for something I'd feel good about at the end of 2024. I then went through and picked a goal for each of my other categories with the idea that it should be a bit of a stretch, but not overwhelming. I also didn't make my goals so rigid that I was setting myself up for failure. For example, I didn't say I was going to work out every day for an hour. At this point, I don't know what this postpartum season is going to look like, and pressures on my daily schedule were not a good place to start. So instead, I chose a year-end goal of being able to run a mile on my treadmill, which, don't laugh, but that's a stretch for me. And while I will create a plan for getting there, it also allows flexibility throughout the year to accommodate my life and my health without instantly failing if I don't show up for a few days. I also want to mention, just in case you have a business like I do, that I did in fact pick one overall goal for my business for the year, but it was a revenue goal. So there will be several mini goals, if you will, to get me there, which brings me to the third thing I did, which was to create a plan for achieving each goal. And yes, I have 2 planners devoted solely to my business. Don't let that overwhelm you if you aren't a planner person, but that is what keeps me on track. There are probably a million ways to do this, so keep in mind that I'm just following what makes sense to my very type A business-minded brain. You might, however, need something less formal, or it will create more anxiety instead of less. But what I did was to create quarterly goals that would act as baby steps to the big goal. So basically, where should I be in 3, 6, and 9 months to achieve this? Some categories will be pretty straightforward. For my homemaking goal, I will have completed 3 rooms by 3 months, etc. For my personal health goal, I should be at 1/4 of a mile in 3 months, 1/2 a mile in 6 months, etc. The homesteading goal is not going to be perfectly spaced and is going to have to take into consideration the seasons and when we have the time available. Then things like my business goal are going to have obviously more pieces and supporting systems in order for it to be achieved. But even then, I'm going to break things down in a way that doesn't include me running at full speed come January 1st. So for example, in the first 3 months of the year, my goals are going to simply revolve around consistency in what I'm already doing and not adding in a bunch of new things. Another way to do this baby step method of achieving goals that works really well when it comes to homesteading and homemaking is to give yourself a project or new thing to learn for each month. For example, your overarching homesteading goal could be to learn new skills. You could then say that in January you're going to learn to crochet, February you're going to make a sourdough starter, etc. These would help you move forward towards a long-term goal of maybe being more self-sufficient without having to feel the pressure of something drastic like producing all of your own food. At this point, I was feeling really content with my goal planning, but I didn't like just tossing out all of my other hopes and dreams and ideas from my brainstorm, so instead I created pages in a notebook for each season. Then I wrote out each category, and then I just jotted some notes from my brainstorm pages. So for example, I really wanted to start all of my own starts this year, but I also didn't want to put pressure on myself in case it didn't work out for whatever reason. So instead, I wrote notes on my winter page under homesteading like set up seed starting area, order seeds, and start early seeds. Then on my spring page, I have continue starting seeds. So then as I'm planning out the months and the weeks as I go throughout the year, I can add in these things if they're still important to me in that season with the flexibility to just say, you know what, this year is not the year for that. So that's basically it as far as goal planning, but I've already been asked about something else that fits well with this discussion, so I'll answer it here, and that is, how will my pretty rigid daily schedule change in the postpartum period? So this is how I handle this situation during any busy or difficult time. This includes sickness or early pregnancy, or just an off week for our family, and that is to ignore the time suggestions on my schedule and just use it as a guide. So for example, I probably won't set an alarm in the first month with a newborn, but when I do get up, I'm going to go through the same steps that we always do, taking out the least important steps as needed. Maybe that means schoolwork will run a little later in the day, or maybe we won't do things like science or history for a few weeks. It's okay, we'll just flow through our routines as best as possible and know that things will get back on track in time. In addition to just giving myself some grace in the transition and being intentional with my goals, there are a few other things I'm doing to set myself up for success in 2024. Number 1, I'm going to delegate more. In my home, that means holding my kids accountable for their chores instead of just running behind everyone and completing everything they don't do. In my business, that means hiring help and actually just letting those people do their jobs without micromanaging everything. Number 2, I'm also going to continually declutter and simplify our home. I've done a ton of this over the last few years, but I know that it's a continual process, and the less we own, the more simple and manageable our life will feel. Number 3, I'm going to keep our schedule very simple. We are already pretty good about this, but we will definitely continue to not add in extracurriculars to our evenings or weekends so that we can prioritize family time and the slower pace of life that we thrive in. Well, thanks for coming along with me today as I plan for 2024. Maybe having a plan for this new year is what I needed to encourage labor to start. I can hope so anyway. And don't worry, I'll keep you all in the loop here when baby boy does arrive. I'd love to hear your homesteading and homemaking goals, so please add them to the comments. And along those same lines, please tell me what tutorials or videos would be helpful in the coming months. Or maybe you'd like me to share more about one of the plans I laid out for myself today. I'd love to support you in your goals and help make them feel more reachable, even if you're juggling babies or a busy schedule. If homesteading, homeschooling, food from scratch, and creating a handmade home are of interest to you, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you here next week.